And now an exclusive 8 on Your Side investigation that is so unbelievable, so far-fetched, you're going to think we're making this up. But the truth be told here, we may just be scratching the surface. It has to do with millions of your taxpayer dollars getting into the hands of criminals. News Channel 8's Lauren Make is joining us now with details on what is a tax fraud scam that really has exploded here in the Tampa Bay area. I mean, you couldn't make this up.
Yeah, Keith, you know, we started hearing about this a while ago. About 6 months ago, I started reporting on some frustrated Tampa Bay residents. Someone had used their name and social security numbers to file a tax return and get a refund of thousands of dollars. Now, at the time, we didn't know just how big of a problem this was. Now, we do. Criminals have turned the tax refund system into a way to make a lot of money. We are talking a lot of money. Millions of dollars in fraudulent refunds are being issued by the U.S. government and sent to addresses here in Tampa. There is now a joint task force involving the Secret Service, Tampa Police, and others working on this problem. In an 8 on Your Side exclusive investigation, I found out how it spread and the challenges for law enforcement agencies here trying to stop it. Police dressed for battle are taking on a new kind of crime.
We had 5 search warrants that we executed.
In a blitz of operations this week, they seized cars, took suspects into custody, and mobilized to combat a crime that's flown largely under the radar and is making a lot of people a lot of money. We got an inside look at the operation as it unfolded.
You see we got this blue Jaguar we took yesterday. If you look over here, we've got the white Jaguar.
Were they purchased using refund money?
Yes, they was all purchased and basically paid for with cash.
And that cash came from the government ultimately.
Yeah.
In this crime, perpetrators file tax returns using other people's identities. They use names and social security numbers of deceased individuals they find on sites like Ancestry.com or names of living individuals they get or buy from people with access to databases of perhaps patients or employees.
There's a lot of people that just saw that how easy it was to do and decided that I'm going to do that over going and working at McDonald's.
Tampa Police Sergeant Terry Goff says it spread like wildfire. You call this tax fraud?
Yes.
What do they call it?
They call it TurboTax.
TurboTax, the popular online tax filing software that lets you file your tax return online and get a fast refund. You can even get money on a preloaded Visa card that can be used at ATMs and stores.
We have people making millions.
It's affording an extravagant lifestyle with fancy cars and jewelry.
Tax season again.
The practice is so common and the lifestyle so appealing, it even inspired a rap song. Those who learned how to make money this way taught others. In Tampa's Ybor City this spring, law enforcement says there were actual classes attended by 50 to 100 people, and the teacher would get a cut of what they made. By then, the checks and preloaded cards were on the radar of Tampa Police and other agencies, aiming to stop both the crimes and the money. Over about 3 months, the United States Postal Inspection Service pulled about 10,000 checks and debit cards from the mail stream just in Tampa. That represents about $50 million. This is the second round of collections, making for a total of about $100 million in just the past 6 months, according to Postal Inspector Doug Smith.
This is probably the most outrageous criminal misuse of the mail that I've seen in regards to this type of fraud. And I've been doing this 10 years.
These envelopes were flagged on their way to Tampa addresses. Authorities say suspects may have them sent to their own homes or to a vacant home where they retrieve them. If you're getting 10,000, if you're getting 50 million, how much are you not getting?
I have no idea.
For Tampa Police Detective Sal Augiri, it's business and personal.
I'm a cop and I'm investigating the law enforcement side of it. In the same breath, I'm a taxpayer and I'm getting, feel like I have my money stolen day in and day out, and I get to talk to the people that are doing it.
He says informants tell him you don't know how big this is.
When I came on in the mid-'80s, that's when crack was just hitting the street, and like within 2 or 3 years, it was crazy. And that's exactly what TurboTax is like. It's just rock cocaine on a plastic card.
But while that drug tended to spark violence, This changed the crime scene in a different way, even contributing to an apparent drop in crime, until perpetrators became targets because of their money.
In drug holes, where you would typically see your crackhead walking around, you don't see that kind of traffic out there anymore. You see cars driving through, nice cars, Jaguars, Benzes, BMWs, Hummers, stuff that typically you wouldn't see in 10 years ago.
Police started finding those cars during traffic stops about a year ago, around the same time they were getting complaints of identity theft. Then Tampa Police Chief Jane Castor says they came across the crime in action.
We've gone into locations where we've found, 5, 6, 7, 8 people all on laptops.
One of those situations ultimately led investigators to search this home on Caracas Street. This isn't the only spot here in Tampa where authorities say this type of activity is taking place. They say there are more locations and more players. But the investigation has some roadblocks. How do you go about combating this?
Well, it was very complex, and we ran into, the first obstacle we ran into would be just the federal laws of tax themselves.
Privacy laws dating back to the 1960s prevent law enforcement from getting access to tax forms filed with the IRS. It's designed to protect consumers, but it could have an unintended consequence. The way the laws are set up now, does that structure make it easier for the criminals and more difficult for law enforcement?
At this point, it may.
Law enforcement in Tampa is hoping to get the laws changed so they can get a hold of fraudulent forms.
This is so wildly out of control that something has got to be done about it quickly.
Chief Castor says she's even heard of high school kids doing it. Criminals have found they can get those fraudulent returns through the system.
I believe that the focus is on getting these returns to the citizens quickly, which is admirable, but they're getting these funds out there very quickly, whether it's a legitimate tax return or it's fraudulent.
Castor says that's up to the federal government to deal with, but for her team, it would be much easier to investigate if police could get information about the crimes. Tampa police have made arrests in connection with fraudulent tax returns, but none of the suspects so far have been charged with tax fraud, because police say they can't get the information from the government to do it. Would you like to see them charged with tax fraud?
Sure, that's what they're doing.
So how much money are we talking here? Well, we haven't gotten an official total on that, but the police chief told me today that they're probably stopping less than 10% of the money. So remember, I said they've gotten $100 million so far this year. So if that's right, and if you do the math, you could be looking at $1 billion crime here.
And we're only talking here locally. I mean, remind you that Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, $65 billion. I mean, we're talking nationwide. This could be amazing. But specifically, it's Tampa, and why the Tampa Bay area?
Well, Keith, nobody seems to have a really good answer on that. One reason might be that Tampa is focusing on it. There's the old idea that if you look for something, you'll find it. So it may be everywhere, but not every police force is targeting it. Now, it's really been a fascinating investigation that I've worked on with my Tampa Tribune colleague, Elaine Silvestrini, and of course, we'll have more on that in tomorrow's Tampa Tribune.
And I'm sure it's not the last we've heard about this. There's much more to be done. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. Lauren Make reporting tonight. And again, so how much would you be willing to pay to cash a check? Probably not as much as 50 or even 80% of the check's face value, but criminals who get those checks illegally are willing to pay a high price to turn their ill-gotten gains into cold cash. And authorities say that's what's happening with scammers who are using other people's identities to file tax returns. It is another side of the massive tax fraud scheme that Lauren Make has uncovered in our 8 on Your Side investigation.
Bogus tax checks, that's what we call them.
Check cashing is big business for Carl Hancock at Mr. Money Pawn. But there are some checks he doesn't want to touch. Hancock says he was seeing high-dollar treasury checks well after tax season this year.
The cars that would pull in and 4 people walk in with $9,500 tax checks.
He turned them down, but it wasn't until he saw our investigation that he realized they could be part of a crime that in Tampa Bay alone may have swindled $1 billion from the government. Criminals succeeded in getting tax refunds by filing returns under other people's names. How many do you think that you have seen and turned down?
1,000, at least 1,000. And I could have made a fortune, but we knew it wasn't right.
He says sometimes they even offered him a cut of the money, 20 or 40% instead of the usual 2% fee. What Hancock witnessed here in his Tampa shop gives us some insight into the sort of underground economy that's grown up around the crime known on the street as TurboTax. When people file these fraudulent tax returns, they use calculations that will get them a big refund between about $5,000 and $10,000. And they get that refund on a treasury check or a preloaded debit card. But either way, the criminal then has to turn that into cash.
It was basically money laundering.
Sergeant Terry Goff says that's where businesses come in.
What the businesses would do is they would say, hey, you know, I'll cash that check for you. And they literally was taking 80%.
Sometimes the checks get passed around. At Empire Streetwear in Tampa, police say they recently seized $123,000 in treasury checks. According to an FBI affidavit, Empire owner Riyad Suleiman, seen here in court for an unrelated case, tried to move dozens of treasury checks by hooking up with a check cashing store in Broward County this May. The FBI says the plan was to give that store's owner 15% of the value of the checks and 8% to someone who introduced them, keeping the rest. Suleiman's attorney says he entered a plea of not guilty and no longer owns the Empire store as of June. Police say the owner of a different store on Hillsborough Avenue admitted others brought him cards so he could withdraw money from them. According to a police report, Raid Faria said people were afraid to do it themselves, so he made a deal with them. And for every $1,000 in refund money he got off the TurboTax cards, he received a $300 cut. When we stopped by Faria's store, he told us the report isn't true. It says you told them that you were getting money off the TurboTax cards.
I never said that.
You never told police that. Back at Mr. Money, Carl Hancock says if he'd cashed the suspicious checks he's seen in the past few months, $1 million would have passed through this store. He now knows that's just a fraction of what's out there. Are you angry about the fact that they're getting this money?
Very angry and very proud that we didn't participate. Very proud.
Another interesting thing that Carl Hancock told me, the people who came in to cash these checks that he was suspicious of, they all had IDs with them that matched those checks. So that raises all kinds of other questions about whether people are making or buying IDs in other people's names.
Well, is this going on as we speak? Are more checks coming in? Does he still see this happening?
Well, he says, when I talked to him, he said that he hadn't seen any since the operation that police made a few weeks ago. But law enforcement are saying that this crime is still happening out there and it is not over.
Well, you know, as a taxpayer and all of us, it makes you mad to think that this sort of thing is going on. So you just imagine what the people who are victimized by this, those still waiting on their tax refunds, as you pointed out.
And they are waiting. I've definitely heard from them as well.
So frustrating for them. All right, thank you for the report, Lauren.
Live from the News Center in high definition, this is News Channel 8 on your side at 6.
Good evening, I'm Stacey Scheibel.
And I'm Keith Kate. Thank you for joining us tonight. The death of a child is, of course, devastating. And now a twist in the tax fraud scheme that we've been telling you about is adding new agony for some grieving parents as they find out that someone else has used their child's information on a tax return to get money from the government. News Channel 8's Lauren Make has the latest twist in this 8 on Your Side tax fraud investigation.
This one is him, like a little preacher.
Natalie Douglas says her son Terrence wasn't your typical 5-year-old. While other kids might head to a party looking for hot dogs and cake,
TJ's somewhere looking for a microphone to try to preach. He's singing gospel songs.
But Terrence Hamilton Jr.'s life was cut short when just weeks after his 5th birthday, he drowned in a swimming pool. A year later, memories are still difficult.
He always knew cars. He always would say,
For Natalie Douglas, more shock followed. When she filed her taxes this year, Douglas says she learned someone else had already claimed her son on a tax return.
At first, I was amazed. I was like, are you serious?
It's a morbid twist on a lucrative tax fraud scheme. In some cases, criminals file returns pretending to be someone else. In the case of deceased children, they claim dependents for a refund.
This is a deceased child. I mean, this is like the bottom of the pit for me.
Douglas says the IRS told her to resubmit her return without TJ's information. Did you have any idea how somebody would have gotten his Social Security number?
I have no clue.
Douglas worried someone she knows could be responsible, but thousands of families are vulnerable to this crime because of public access to Social Security numbers that can be found on sites like Ancestry.com. At a hearing in Washington, another family testified this spring about a similar experience with their daughter.
She was only 5 months old, so her Social Security number wasn't bouncing around many places.
Natalie Douglas worries it will keep happening.
And IRS is just going to issue out the check and say, okay, we're not going to tell you who did it. We're just going to request that they pay the money back, which 9 chances out of 10, the money spent, they're not going to pay it back.
She wants those responsible prosecuted.
It's like I can hear my baby's voice saying, Mom, don't let them get away with it.
Natalie Douglas has 4 other children, and TJ is the only one that this has happened with. She's working with a private investigator to try to get to the bottom of her case. Now, her tax preparer says about 25 or 30 of his clients have dealt with identity theft and tax fraud issues this year, but this is the first one that involves a child.
So we don't know how someone got her child's information, but we do know that Social Security numbers online is a problem, and it's also an issue that was supposedly being dealt with. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Senator Nelson is trying to address. The legislation that he filed this summer does include restricting access to what's called the death master file. But for now, though, things stay the same until that legislation works its way through the process. All
right, Lauren Make, staying on top of it. Thank you.
We begin tonight with an 8 on your side investigation that made it all the way to Washington, D.C. Today, the U.S. Senate heard the results of our investigation into the tax fraud happening here in Tampa Bay. Criminals are using someone else's name and Social Security number to file a tax return, and they are succeeding in getting refunds from the federal government. $1 billion may have been stolen here in the Tampa Bay region just this year. Now, lawmakers are saying it has to stop. Lauren Make broke this story, and she has an update tonight on this 8 on your side investigation.
There is a tax scam that is going on in this country.
Tax fraud in Tampa Bay is now in the national spotlight, as Senator Bill Nelson urged colleagues from the Senate floor to help put a stop to it.
That's a ripoff of the American taxpayer because that's their money.
It's a lot of money, coming in the form of preloaded debit cards and treasury checks. Authorities caught $100 million in the mail, but the crime could be worth $1 billion here. I interviewed Senator Nelson about the problem in Florida last week after he filed legislation to help tackle the issue we first told you about this spring. Starting in February, taxpayers contacted 8 on Your Side and told us someone had filed tax returns using their personal information, causing headaches and a months-long delay in getting their real refund. Meanwhile, millions of dollars from false returns were affording an extravagant lifestyle for thieves.
The jewelry, the cash that's thrown around, the cars.
Tax season again.
It's so appealing, it even inspired a rap song about the money to be made and the women making it happen. Now, local law enforcement, teaming with the Secret Service and the U.S. Postal Inspector's Office, are cracking down on the crime. But police say they run into roadblocks like privacy laws that prevent the IRS from sharing information.
And of course, we want to protect the privacy of people, but we also want to go after these crooks.
The issue has also caught the attention of U.S. Representative Kathy Castor, who this week called for a hearing into the tax fraud scheme. Both have said they believe the crime is happening beyond Tampa Bay. And if that's true, it could be costing U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars.
When somebody in this electronic age can just sit at a computer, steal a Social Security number, and then file a false tax return, enough is enough.
Lauren Make, News Channel 8.
Senator Nelson's legislation also calls for an IRS liaison to work with local law enforcement. It also asks for a closer look at the tax software and prepaid cards criminals are using.